Okay. Is this the most practical?
Yeah.
Well, no.
Okay.
In most classrooms and with most students, offering a range of different levels of activities, such as tiered assignments, tiered writing prompts, and tiered questions, is adequate for tackling our students' differences in readiness. It is most often the case that some students know and understand a little bit about a topic, while others know and understand much more about it, but not probably everything about it. So tiering is frequently the strategy of choice when differentiating instruction based on readiness. And keep in mind that there are different tools, such as Bloom's taxonomy and Tomlinson's equalizer, that we can use to tier tasks in a variety of different ways. However, there are times in all classrooms when simply tiering activities and tasks throughout a unit isn't enough to satisfy the intellectual and academic needs of some students. It is at these times when teachers in differentiated classrooms rely on another powerful strategy, curriculum compacting. If you've ever seen how a trash compactor works, compacting trash to make space for more, then you have some idea about how curriculum compacting works. Only here, we're not dealing with trash. Compacting curriculum is basically a way to buy time for students to participate in more challenging activities rather than learning material that they already know or doing work that they already know how to do. The reality is that in many classrooms, several students already know much of what we are about to teach. All of us as teachers have experienced the feeling at some point, or we probably will soon, that we have a student who knows more about a particular topic we're teaching than we do. This is a very good sign that curriculum compacting may be needed. Other signs that compacting may be needed include a student seeming bored much of the time, a student consistently finishing his or her work early, and that work is correct, a student being frequently looked to for help by other students, or a student having high test scores despite not turning in stellar classwork. Basically, when a teacher notices that there's really not much he can teach a student or a group of students about a particular topic or skill, compacting is critical. Basically, curriculum compacting consists of three main goals: identifying your objectives for a particular unit of study. So, what do you want your students to know, understand, and be able to do? Assessing whether or not your students have already mastered some or all of these objectives, and then offering more challenging options to those students who have mastered all or most of your objectives. There are 8 steps in curriculum compacting, and they are much like those in tiering. First, the teacher identifies her objectives for a particular unit. Then she finds, or creates, a pre-assessment that is aligned with those objectives. As discussed in the previous course, you shouldn't feel that you have to create a pre-assessment from scratch if there's a post-assessment that you can use as your pre-assessment. Third step, and here's where I tend to modify the steps in my own teaching, compacting asks teachers to identify which of their students might benefit from compacting and pre-assess only those students. In my own teaching, because I'm going to use a pre-assessment to guide all of my instructional decision-making, not just my use of compacting, I give all of my students the pre-assessment. This will help me make good decisions for all of my students throughout the unit. The fourth step in compacting is to go ahead and then give the pre-assessment. Once the pre-assessment has been analyzed, the teacher then gets rid of all practice and instruction that students don't need. So for instance, if I give a pre-assessment on converting fractions to decimals, and 2 of my students ace that pre-assessment, then those 2 students will not participate in the instruction and activities that the other students need to master converting fractions to decimals. The fact is that they don't need that teaching and practice. So what's an appropriate mastery level on a pre-assessment? I think that varies from teacher to teacher and from topic to topic, or skill to skill. For me, I don't like to go below a mastery level of 85%. And if the material is fairly concrete and basic, such as spelling or basic math facts, then I'm likely to have an even higher mastery level, perhaps 90% or 95%. It's very likely that the students who do well on the unit pre-assessment will have some gaps in the knowledge or skill level, so some instruction may be needed. It's important to keep this instruction as streamlined as possible. That's the 6th step in compacting. What this means is that the teacher offers what I call mini lessons that focus on areas of need for particular students. It's important that we make no assumptions about what students know or can pick up on their own. Even our brightest learners will need some direct instruction at some points. The seventh step in compacting is to substitute more appropriately challenging activities for those students who have essentially placed out of all or a portion of a unit. The question here is, what can this student or these students do while the rest of the class is moving through the regular curriculum? There are several options for alternative activities once students have compacted out of the regular curriculum, and many of them can be offered and managed in the regular classroom. For instance, in primary and upper elementary classrooms, students might be offered opportunities to participate in independent or small group studies, to visit interest-based learning centers, or to be accelerated through the curriculum by perhaps working on the material for the next grade level. Older students might be offered similar opportunities, as well as perhaps internships or mentorships in the community. These, of course, would extend beyond the regular classroom. The trick when developing any alternate activity for a student or a group of students is to consider student interests. A student is not likely to want to do something that might be seen as extra if it is of little interest to him. A key step in all of this is keeping records. This doesn't necessarily mean changing the way you currently keep records of student learning, but you want to make sure that the basis for the decisions you make about compacting is clear and defensible. It's likely that you'll have students, parents, and perhaps even administrators wondering why some students are doing some alternate activities in your classroom rather than following the regular curriculum. It's a good idea to keep track of who's doing what, and more important, why. Most often, when students compact out of some of or all of the regular curriculum in a particular unit, they study instead something related to that unit. For instance, a student who is compacted out of the regular study of weather may conduct some research on a particular facet of weather that is not part of the regular curriculum, such as how weather impacts local economies, or how local changes in weather indicate global climate changes. This is where independent study comes into play. A well-organized independent study is a great way to allow a student or a group of students to study something of interest while being appropriately challenged. It's important that students who compact out of the regular curriculum be offered an assignment that keeps them engaged and keeps them learning. The last thing a teacher wants is a bright student who, because he or she is not engaged with his or her own work, becomes a distraction to others in the classroom who are working on mastering the regular curriculum. I recommend beginning the independent study with a conference with the student or students who will be working on it to determine their interests and to outline logistics and your expectations for their behavior. For instance, what should a student do when she has a question for you but you're busy with other students? How should she communicate with you regularly about her progress on her independent study? Where will the resources she might need be kept? When will there be checkpoints along the way or times when she will be expected to show you her work? And how will she ultimately share her work with others? Signing a contract with students that outlines the expectations for the independent study is a really good idea. I also ask my students to use checklists of the steps they will need to take to complete their independent work. For younger students, it helps to provide them with a checklist of the steps, but older students benefit greatly from the opportunity to plan their steps themselves. It makes sense for students who have compacted out of the regular curriculum by proving mastery on an assessment to work on their independent studies when the rest of the class is working with the regular curriculum. This is where good classroom management is critical. It's important to keep in mind that even though they're not working with you all the time, the compacted students need to have time to interact with you to discuss their work. I also recommend that older students be asked to keep a reflective journal where they can write about what they're learning along the way, as well as the problems they're encountering. This can be a great communication tool, and it can help with the assessment of the study. Often the ideas that students have and the leaps they make are not evident in their final products. You'll talk more about curriculum compacting and independent study during your web session, but before then, please take some time to reflect on the places in your curriculum where you think curriculum compacting might be useful. For instance, based on your experience, are there topics during the course of the school year that some students tend to already know a lot about or have a lot of experience with? Next, brainstorm ideas for independent studies that address the units that you teach and that you think might be of interest to your students. You may even want to begin thinking about how you might manage independent studies in your classroom.